purpose of this meeting is for orientation. So there are no votes, but according to the open meetings law, we have to post it. The Secretary of State will be taking some brief minutes. We'll be answering phone calls. So my name is Rich LeClaire. I'm the acting chair of the Governance Council for Behavioral Health and its capacity. Great. The meeting will be recorded, so those who can't make this meeting can listen to it. The slides will be shown, but there'll be no faces, so you can all relax. You won't have to be scanning the room for whoever's talking. I think you all have copies of the agenda. Essentially, I'll be talking a little bit about the statutory functions of the Governance Council. Donna will talk about the federal regulation and needs assessment that pertains to the Governance Council. Linda about the Open Meetings Act. And Donna again about the block grant application, how we can access that. And there'll be questions and comments. But if you have questions as you go along, please feel free to ask them. There's no sense in waiting an hour to ask a question that happened at the beginning to help you understand stuff. I would, however, like to take a few minutes because we've had probably 8 or 9 new members to the Governance Council in the last 3 or 4 months. So we haven't had a chance to have this orientation, which should have happened a little bit earlier. But the meetings, as you know, on Thursday don't always lend themselves to spending some time about introductions of people. So I'd like to spend at least a little bit of time at the beginning to have us introduce ourselves. And especially if you're a new council member, but even if you aren't, say a few words about, and you can, as long as it doesn't go on for 5 minutes. So somewhere around 45 seconds to a minute would be the amount of time of your interest here, what you bring to it, because maybe the opportunity for us to at least engage in that sort of limited way, meeting once a month, going right into business and leaving, running to our appointments after doesn't always give us a chance to engage in discussions among ourselves. And I don't think we'll be planning a family picnic or something for everybody this summer to engage in that. So I'll be talking a little bit about my involvement in part of my presentation, but I'd like to turn it over to John. Why don't we just go around the room, say who you are, your involvement in the Governance Council so far, interests you might have, and we'll move it from there. And if you tend to lose track of time, I will remind you.
John Tassoni, President and CEO of the Substance Use Mental Health Leadership Council, which we have 38 members, 33 of them do direct service.
And John is a member of the Governance Council by statute.
George O'Toole, Associate Director of East Bay Recovery Center with EBCAP. I am a person in recovery, and I've been with a member of the council now for over 5 years, maybe 6 years.
You get a pension.
Do I?
Cara Boulay, I'm both a family member and a consumer. I work at various organizations throughout the state, NAMI, OASIS, and I've just co-founded a new peer support space called Winter Community Care in Pawtucket. And so I'm just here to be part of the council. I'm new, so I don't really know exactly everything yet, but I'm here to learn and be a voting member.
Good morning, Jason Lyon, clinical social worker by trade and behavioral health administrator at Medicaid.
Linda Riley, Governor, worked for the Behavioral Health, Developmental Disabilities and Hospitals Department, and I am a staff member for the council.
DMISEC, I provide administrative support to the Governor's Council.
Lori Marie Pashota, Mental Health Association of Rhode Island, or MAHARI, as I like to say. I identify as someone with lived experience, and my organization tries to increase access to treatment through policy, education, non-clinical research, and advocacy.
I'm Sarah Dinklage. I'm a member of the council. I can't tell you how long, but Rich just called me a veteran, so it must be a long time. I am CEO of Rhode Island Student Assistance Services, Coastline EAP, Prevention Early Intervention Services, and co-chair of the council's Prevention Advisory Committee.
Morning, everyone. My name is Larry Warner. I'm the Chief Impact and Equity Officer with United Way of Rhode Island, for the council, and former member and co-chair of the Commission for Health Advocacy and Equity. Forward starting with all of you.
Donna Rook, BHDDH. I'm administrator. I'm a block grant planner, and one of my responsibilities is seeing some aspects of the governor's council.
Ian Lacombe. I am a registered nurse at Butler Hospital and here for the representing the union as a member of the 1199.
Hi, I'm Carolina DeMario, serving my second term in the Rhode Island Senate. I was just appointed to the council last August, I believe. And outside of my work in the Senate, I am a licensed mental health counselor. I've been in practice in an agency setting and in private practice for the last 20 years. I also serve on the Health and Human Services Committee, so I'm very interested in workforce sustainability issues and making sure that we're able to meet the needs of Rhode Islanders.
Hi, I'm Leslie Garcia. I'm an assistant dean at the college at Federal University, specifically in the areas of class year advising and recovery and substance-free initiatives. I'm a person in long-term recovery, identify as a super consumer, I think. And I also am a board member at Rye Cares.
I am Janet Spinelli. I'm a site clinical nurse specialist. I'm an advocate for older adult mental health care and co-chair the Rhode Island Elder Mental Health and Addiction Coalition.
With me, Chris Gadbois. My background is as an advanced practice public health nurse, and I run a small nonprofit healthcare company, CareLink, and I co-chair the Rhode Island Elder Mental Health and Addiction Coalition and help lead the long-term care coordinating council's behavioral health work.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ove Paf. I am the Regional Coalition Director for the City of Providence the Community Office. I am public member, I think 3 years ago. I think I don't remember that. I am part of about the Prevention Impact Subcommittee.
Morning, Brina Sheehan, Vice President, Clinical Integration at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island. Been working in the behavioral health system for many, many years and really interested in thinking through what system transformation looks like.
Good morning, I'm Maria Samini. I'm the Director of the Office of Healthy Aging. So I come to this seat looking to think about behavioral health as it impacts older adults in the state.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Caitlin Medeiros. I am the acting child advocate with the Office of the Child Advocate, and we serve as the oversight agency to DCYF, and specifically, we ensure that the needs of children in state care are being met. And I am a new member. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Constant. I'm with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, Rhode Island chapter.
Morning, I'm Ian Knowles, a person in long-term recovery from my addiction to alcohol and other drugs. I work as program director at Rhode Island Communities for Addiction Recovery.
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Mary Searles. I am the Director of Communication for the Hospital Association. Lisa is actually Tamako, our VP, is a member, so I'm here on her behalf. And I've been coming to meetings for quite some time. And behavioral health has always been sort of an interest because of the family that have dealt with many issues and order an anchor back in the day. I love the story that was really
Hi, I'm Maggie Lamb. I am the director of the Office of the Mental Health Advocate. For those of you who don't know about our office or me, we're a small independent state agency. We're essentially a legal office and we represent people living with serious mental illness, various legal capacities. We also do advocacy for reform in the system. And I've been a statutory member since I was appointed 10 years ago. So.
Tom Mark, I'm the director of the VH division here at VHD.
I'm Beth Matthews, and I work at VHTDH doing special projects.
I'm Jess Elliott. I am the, I believe, newest employee of VHTDH as of 35 minutes ago.
Administrative management, and I come from the treatment end.
I'm Rebecca Outling, Associate Administrator, BHDH, working with Donna on your block grant.
Great. I think we covered everybody. Yes, we have. Okay. Again, welcome, everyone. There will be no test on this, but at least it's the beginning of an introduction and you can make connections outside the meeting if you want or before the meeting. So let's get down to the agenda. The slide, first slide indicates that the Governor's Council is established by statute, by law in Rhode Island. It's been revised a number of times. But to give you some context to where this statute for the Governor's Council occurred, let's go back a little closer to the time of Adam and Eve on this, where there was a Governor's Council on Mental Health and an advisory substance use mental health council that was in effect sometimes in the early 1970s. The reason for that is in the funding for community mental health system in Rhode Island started initially with a lot of federal initiatives, all generated by the Community Mental Health Act of 1963, signed by President Kennedy 1 month before he was assassinated. So this was the last act that he signed before his assassination. There were several iterations of this act to improve it, and slowly funding for community mental health centers started in the late 60s and early 70s. In Rhode Island, it was more the early 70s, with Newport Mental Health being the first mental health center getting federal funding under the Community Mental Health Act. That was 7 years worth of funding. The assumption being after 7 years, you're on your own and you can do okay. Well, that never really works, as you know. 7 years is better than one, but 7 years ends at some period of time, and then what takes it over? There was no funding of mental health or addiction treatment by Medicaid in that period of time. That did not occur until the mid-1980s. So the only funding that was in place in the 1970s was through the federal Community Mental Health Act. After Newport, I think Washington County came, Providence Center shortly thereafter, the Pawtucket Central Falls Mental Health Clinic, Northern Rhode Island, and virtually every catchment area, service area of Rhode Island did receive some level of federal funding. Now, some of it ended a bit early in 1980, in 1981 with Ronald Reagan and the reform of creating block grants instead of community mental health center funding that occurred then. And the funding was essentially just for mental health, a little bit on the addiction side, but not all that much in terms of funding for community mental health centers. The federal government required that the states have a process in place for getting public input into those grants and getting information and evaluating those particular grants from SAMHSA. So the Governor's Council was created roughly during that period of time for mental health and for on the addiction side, although the Substance Abuse Council, as it was called at the time, was not a Governor's Council. It was appointed a little bit differently, and that was not required necessarily by the block grant. So the block grants occurred in 1981, 1982. Basically, there was a formula that was used that said Rhode Island gets so many of these federal grants. Therefore, we're going to put it all together and we're going to give it as a block grant to the state instead of funding each of the organizations for that period of time. Because states know best what to do with the funding. Direct federal funding to community organization doesn't really make sense. But what was done was the pool of funding was put together, and guess what? About 15% taken over the top. And so Rhode Island got less money, as all the other states did, from that block grant mechanism. So there was a check that was written to Rhode Island in the amount of about $8 million in 1982, 1983. Per present dollars, that would be around $35–40 million. The only requirement was they needed to know the bank account that the state wanted the check deposited in. There was roughly no planning for that first block grant that we got. Since then, and Donna's going to tell you a little bit, about the evolution of block grant, where the amount of funding we get now is significantly less, with the exception of a lot of the COVID funding that occurred in the last 2 or 3 years that doubled and tripled it. But I know on the mental health side, pre-COVID, it was somewhere around $2 to $3 million for mental health addiction treatment, a little bit more. So there's a lot of shrinkage. So when the federal government talks about block granting certain things, those of us who were around that period of time know it's just a matter of time before that block grant just shrinks by 95%. And then the problem goes away because it's now handed over to the state to do what it's supposed to do with a heck of a lot less funding. But with those block grants, slowly they realize we got to do more than just get a checking account of the state where to deposit that check. We're going to make some requirements. We're going to create the requirement that there be a state planning council. So what Rhode Island says, well, our Governor's Council on Mental Health will be the state planning council for the mental health block grant. And then there's a substance abuse council, advisory council, and that can advise on the block grants for the addiction side. And so we'll do it that way. So there's a function of the Governor's Council that we have that has a state requirement and a federal requirement. In a few minutes, as I sit down, we'll talk about this.
I'm not anymore. You just went over all my slides, right?
We'll go for introduction. So let me try to think. Okay. So then in 2002, 2003, as the field progresses, we realize that you can't keep separating mental health and substance use disorders because they're related. Most individuals have co-occurring of some sort or another and has to be treated that way. And separating the funding and separating the policies really doesn't make any sense. Because in the provider world, what would happen is if you had one issue, one diagnosis to be treated, you could find help for that. If you had two, your odds of getting treatment were significantly reduced because everyone said, oh, you've got an addiction treatment, we only do mental health, or you've got a mental health, we only do addiction, instead of treating both. So the field advanced, except at the federal level, there's still the Center for Mental Health Services and the Center for Substance Abuse Services at SAMHSA. That a lot of states then started combining their councils. So in 2002, 2003, the governor and the General Assembly passed the statute that you have here today in terms of the Governor's Council on Behavioral Health. I was appointed chair of that at that time. And doesn't seem like that long ago, and have been chair for roughly the whole entire period of time. In the last few years as acting chair, since there was a hiatus with the new chair that had taken over back pre-COVID. So I've been on that. I was appointed to the Governor's Council on Mental Health in 1986, and the Governor's Council has had different chairs. We had an attorney, we had advocates, it changed and we would meet at 9 in the morning, meet at 6 at night, we would meet in the attorney's office. It was, all over. So there's continued evolution on it. But the role that the Governor's Council played has been essentially the same, and it's in statute. So you can move the next slide. Okay, so the statute, which has been amended, we have to meet at least 6 times a year. We usually meet monthly. Sometimes we don't have a quorum, so obviously that takes up one of our slots. Or we would, especially in the month of August, which is not a great month to take off, we would not meet because sometimes there's trouble getting a quorum and everything else. And the reason it's always usually not a good time to meet is a lot of the planning grants to the feds are due September 1st, and we have to act on those. And so to act on them in July would be too early. August is a great time. And so sometimes August is not a great month to take it off. Let me do the functions of the council: review and evaluate the behavioral health needs and problems in the state and propose such recommendations as appropriate, to stimulate and seek the development and coordination of all programs related to behavioral health, including but not limited to such areas as care and treatment, prevention, manpower, research, and public education. And then to encourage interdisciplinary approaches to combating, treating, preventing substance use disorders and mental illness, focusing in particular on integrating support systems for behavioral health care. To act as advisory council to the Department of Behavioral Health, Developmental Disabilities and Hospitals, and the governor on any funding made available to the department by the federal government for substance use disorder and/or mental health treatment and prevention purposes. To stimulate and investigate research as it affects planning and implementation of behavioral health care systems in the healthcare environment, and to make an annual report to the governor and the General Assembly during the month of January, setting forth the nature and extent of the behavioral health care problems in the state, information and recommendations as the council deems necessary to deal with those problems, a review of the council's activities during the preceding year, including but not limited to reports relative to activities, performance, and need, any plans developed by the council to deal with behavioral health problems identified by the council, and other recommendations as may be appropriate. So quite a charge, quite a broad charge. In Rhode Island, the governor's council, as in most states, is advisory. We do not have staff. We do not have a budget. There is money in the BHDDH budget to help support our activities. In some states, they hire staff of 3 or 4 individuals. They do research. They give out grants. Just very, very different in other states. They're all placed very differently. So we make it work with the system we have in place as it moved from the 2 council systems we had, as I had mentioned before. We have 32 voting members, and this, not to confuse you anymore, but the role we share or we have for the federal block grant and the federal planning grant has slightly different voting requirements than for the state. So at times it's very interesting as to how we have to maneuver around both systems, having one body as to who can vote and who can't. We have representatives from the General Assembly, 2 at least designated, and openings for them, 2 from the Rhode Island State Senate and 2 from the House. We have 2 appointed by the State Senate, and there are 2 pending from the House. Since its inception in 2002, 2003, we have never had a full complement of legislators on the council. We've had some senators attend occasionally, but they were never designated. And we did have a state representative as a member of the council for probably 10, 15 years, and he's no longer on. Next, we have some statutory, next slide, please. Next, we have some non-legislative, but they're mentioned in statute. So the executive director of the Substance Use Mental Health Leadership Council, John, is on it. We're on the mental health advocate, Meg back there, child advocate. Child advocate was added probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Representative of the AFL-CIO, Ian, joining us, and as his resume goes to the governor's office. And then in the last legislative session, the president of the Hospital Association Rhode Island, or designate, and we have that representative as well. The others are 23 public members. The requirement is that at least 50% of the public members have to be, less than 50% have to be state employees or providers of behavioral health care services. So CEOs of provider organizations sort of count in that category. It can be on, but you're going to be less than 50% added with state employees. There has to be adequate representation for families or consumers. There's a federal requirement for that Donna will get to in a minute. And then you talk about the other requirements in terms of vacancies being filled by the governor's office. The council may make recommendations. Individuals may send a letter on their own without any discussion with us at all to see if they can get onto the council. It's purely up to the governor. There are no term limits on this. I don't know if that was a wise move or not, but if you are on the governor's council, it's for life. After 20 years, there is no pension. About that part of it. And despite my request, there are no low number license plates issued for anybody. So, and I guess the governor designates the chairperson. So the governor is planning to attend our next council on March 9th to make that appointment. Are there any questions so far? I've said, feels like I rambled a little bit, but I hope I was able to share with you at least some of the history and the context of which we now operate in.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if there are questions, I'll turn it over to Donna to look at the federal side of things.
Yeah. I mean, you just got a really good history back to 1970. I cannot do that. Thank you, Rich. So as Rich said, that in order to receive federal block grant funds, we have to have this council establish a mental health planning council. I just want to reiterate one thing that he said, just to make sure everybody picked up on this. Block grants, right? There are some block grants that are what we call base block grants that repeat each year. In other words, we get that funding that continues to come to the state. Right now, we have COVID block grants, and they're one-time block grants. We have a number of them. But for the purposes of this council, the mental health ones, we have a supplement, COVID supplement, and an ARPA that's coming up. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that those will end. In other words, that funding is going to end. So it's going to be important that this council look at services, what services we're providing, and how we're going to shift, because they do not lend to sustainability, right? When a block grant is ending, there's no sustainability. That is a problem, and we have to look at other ways to keep programs going that we want to see continue, because we have to come up with sustainability plans. The duties, as Rich said, mirror the state, the federal, and specifically our project officers from SAMHSA. This council, this responsibilities and roles mirror the others, so that they kind of overlap quite a bit. We have where I work for, who I have contact with at SAMHSA are two project officers. One's for substance abuse. They use different terms than we use. They don't use substance use disorder, they use substance abuse, and the mental health one as well. The mental health project officer is far more concerned about this council. In fact, it's a standing agenda on our monthly meetings. Wants to know what's going on the council, wants to know if there's any new members and who they are. They collect that contact information. Just so that you're aware of it, it is a concern to them, and they want to know the opinions of the council. Okay, mental health planning. So this is called the Governor's Council on Behavioral Health. They refer to it as the Mental Health Advisory Council. And like I just said, they maintain a list of membership and contact information, which we'll talk about if we have time at the end of this meeting on the website, because that information, your name and your email is public, and we want to make sure that we have everything listed there accurately. The criteria for membership representation, which again, Rich already talked about. I won't go through that, but the members are mandated by SAMHSA as well, meaning there's certain representation. It mirrors who's on the council as well as public membership. They want to see that the state is working with other departments and divisions. In other words, they want to make sure that behavioral health is making contact with education, with rehabilitation, criminal justice, housing, social services. And just about every plan that I submit to SAMHSA, they're asking, who did you collaborate with? Who did you talk to? They want to know that we are talking to other people and that we're not doing things in a bubble, that the state is making sure that they're reaching out and that the mental health concerns are crossing over departments and divisions and providers. And that's one of the, roles or, responsibilities that this council has. And that's why there's so many representatives on the council. 51% majority must be comprised of consumers and family members. It's very, very important that we have people with lived experience that are expressing their opinions and concerns and giving advice. That is what one of the standing agenda items for SAMHSA is. When we meet with them, they want to make sure that we are hitting that at least 51% of people with lived experiences. And that's also why when we introduced ourselves and we went around, I made sure I wrote down that, you know, if somebody mentioned that they're in recovery, that's how you're identified with SAMHSA. So that's something I need to make sure I have accurately represented. So what we're supposed to do, provide input in the mental health plan. What Rich just said about August, in August, we want to come to the council and give the plan for the block grants, which we did this past August, because block grant plans are due September 1st. Every 2 years is the big plan, and in between they call them mini plans. We have to make sure that everyone on the council is aware of what the plan is, how much we're spending. There was a PowerPoint that was provided at that time that kind of gives the overview, in my opinion, and it would be a little bit better if we're focused a little bit more on that throughout the year, so that you're not just trying to put the pieces together in August, especially if there's, you know, you're taking your vacation in August too. But to have an active role in participating in what that plan is, it is very, very important. Those are the categories up there to what we want to hear from members about, you know, that we've consulted with, what the recommendations are, any modifications to the plans that have to be made. We want to hear from advocates for both the lifespan, you know, not just adults. This plan that goes to SAMHSA includes children as well. And that, you know, some of the questions that we get asked during that August meeting really help direct us as to where the interest is, what the residents of Rhode Island feel is important and needs to be included. I wanted to take just a little minute to talk about the needs assessments. There's a lot of different needs assessments. You know, organizations have to do it. You know, different entities, providers need to do it, but we also need one for our block grants. So, you know, when we're making recommendations to SAMHSA about why we are putting together a particular plan, they want data to back that up. They want input. They want opinions to back that up. They want kind of a lay of the land of what's being provided in the state, what's working well, what are some of the best practices, and what are some of those barriers or gaps that we are hitting. The Governor's Council, which is the advisory council, is a good place to hear back about those things. So that's why the minutes of this meeting are also very important, because that goes in as evidence of this is why we do what we do. This is why we spend the money with the way we spend the money. That goes into part of, you know, this needs assessment. We have a contract with the University of Rhode Island that does the needs assessment. It's on a 2-year cycle. So it's completed every 2 years, but they're working on it, you know, that entire time on a weekly basis. All right, Rebecca, weekly meetings about the needs assessment in Rhode Island. So it's due this July. It's one cycle, it's ending July. It's starting the first thing up August 1st. They're going to start working on the next one. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that how important it is that we do that, and how the feedback from this council also goes into that needs assessment, and that it's a lot of work on a regular basis actually throughout the state. And then we're going to go to open meetings. Linda, is there any questions? Sorry, any questions about index?
Yeah. So I appreciate your perspective that there should be earlier input into the planning of the strategic plan. I hope that was seen in August is really not sufficient. And also, I still want to really clear about the distinction between the Mental Health Advisory Council and the Governor's Council. Does the Governor's Council essentially serve as the Mental
Yes.
Advisory Council?
It does. It serves as it does serve. It's identified with SAMHSA as the advisory council. Yeah, and just a point that Rich made about the way here in Rhode Island, it's behavioral health, right? We combine substance use disorder and mental health. All states don't do that. In fact, we just met with New Hampshire, and they don't. They do theirs separately. Not only is the council for both substance use disorder and mental health, but when we submit our plan to SAMHSA, we submit a combined plan. It's one. We look at it as behavioral health. SAMHSA does not. You know, they have their separate project officers, and they're very separatist on those levels. But I think most states now are moving away from that model. You know, we could do a combined one and we combine them both, so.
Other questions? I was going to say that the challenge we've had over the course of the Governor's Council has been that normally you would say, here's the needs assessment. This is what the need is. This is the amount of money we're going to put towards that need to run the following programs. And a year later, this is the outcome of those programs. And this is the result of our effort. And this is what we have to tweak and change. That works well in the perfect world. It does not work well despite all the efforts here, because in a way that funding is, what they say, it's fungible, it moves around. So we will look at a block grant and we'll say, look, the block grant funded X project, it doesn't fund it anymore. Why not? Oh, that's funding is now picked up by a different grant that came in. Oh, so then as we try to get a better understanding of this, we then have people come in to explain the whole funding of mental health and addiction for the whole state of Rhode Island with all funding sources. And pretty soon you've got everybody involved and it becomes so massive, it's not possible to understand how the dollars have moved and shifted and whatever. So that becomes part of the challenge, to make it as simple enough so we can understand from a certain level perspective, are the funds being targeted to those areas that are needed, and what's the outcome of that? And we have struggled with outcomes. We can get some outcomes that sometimes they're 3 years, 4 years after the fact, and what good are they? So that's been the challenge, and one's working hard on it, and everyone wants to do that. So it's not a question of desirability, it's just that it hasn't worked that way. Other states have that same challenge as well. And then not only do we have to do it that way, we have to fill out the forms for the federal government. That is a little different than the way we want it. So there's a lot of administrative challenges to getting us this information. And Ian's right. Sometimes getting, a 300 page, it seems like 300 page planning, funding plan, in August to approve at that meeting, it's just impossible to understand. Totally, because of the intricacies of it. Even if you had 6 months, you still would, much less, 30 days. So, but on the other hand, Donna can't start writing it until things are certain in place, the information's captured, we know we have, and the Fed say, go ahead. And so it's been that challenge. I've always felt that at any time, even if we miss that magic date of August, we can always provide feedback, and then it gets logged in on a parking lot for the next time we submit it, and it gets taken into consideration. So that's one of the things.
The whole plan is actually over 400 pages.
Oh.
So yeah, it is big.
And it's not an easy read. I think you'll have reference to that, but it's, I think there's some efforts to try to read federal forms is not something that's inherent to our DNA. The other aspect, a little slightly different, but while I'm on that topic, is over the years, we currently have and have had providers on the Governor's Council organizations. And the challenge has been to make sure that person wearing that hat on the Governor's Council is not here to advocate for solely their programs. It's happened, and we've had some discussions on it. It sometimes comes about specifically because the topic of conversation pertains to the space you're in as a provider, so that's fine. But it isn't to try and get more business or get more funding or get whatever. The perspective is important, but it should not be the only perspective you voice at the Governor's Council on how to make sure your organization survives because you're serving on the Governor's Council on that. We do have 3 committees that I forgot to mention. We've had different ones over the years. Some are ad hoc committees that come and go. Some are more standing committees. Right, those 3 standing committees, we have one on prevention, on the addiction side, the Olmsted Committee, and then the Older Adult Committee. But there's nothing sacred about those. They can come and change. We can modify those. It's whatever the topic is, whatever we want to focus our energy on a subcommittee level to go into more detail on that topic. So, yes, question.
Sorry, quick question. I think I missed this somewhere, but how do you feel as though Rhode Island's not combining the 2 sort of buckets? How does that impact funding? Do you feel like that's an impact as far as not? I guess I just don't know exactly how that works, but does that impact positively, negatively? Do you have a sense of?
personally, I feel it's positive that it's behavioral health and there's so much overlap in substance use disorders and mental illnesses. I think Rich was saying earlier, people, the no wrong door concept. I think I don't know if you're referencing to me saying that, SAMHSA has their substance use PO and their mental health don't meet together, and sometimes they give, conflicting advice on things, but they're very possessive of their funding for their grants. So what I feel like my predecessor here, Candice Rogers, did it really well when she set up something to include in a particular program funding from each source so that we here make sure that it's behavioral health and it isn't so divided. So I think it is positive that, yes, it is that we combine them and it's behavioral health instead of one and the other. That's not who people are.
Right.
When we're talking about the services,
Right. No, I wasn't making sure. I didn't know that impacted.
We get no more money, no less money by adding one council. No.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of money, right? Our base, Rich mentioned before, our base grants are, they didn't increase. The COVID, there's a lot of money for COVID, a lot of money for ARPA. So we have to be aware of when those are ending. And right now, the COVID supplements are ending September 24, and the ARPAs are ending, I'm sorry, not September, March. They're ending March 24, and ARPAs are ending March 25, unless we get some kind of an extension on it. But that's a lot of funding that's going to go away.
Next question about the needs assessment. Does that incorporate the needs of children and adolescents, or is it purely an adults needs assessment?
So do you want to answer that?
As far
as URIs.
you're right, yeah, as adults.
Okay. That's adults, but we do, in our plan, we include a lot of information from DCYF. They submit part of that plan to include children for at least the plan that goes to SAMHSA. But the needs assessment that URI is doing, focusing on the adult system, but then there's other little needs assessments that are done, that will be being done in catchment areas that does include the entire lifespan. Thank you.
There are certain parts, I don't know if you wanted to go over of the block grant that have set asides and designations. Do you remember off that?
I do.
Okay.
Do. Now you're stepping on John's show this afternoon. So there's
That's not uncommon.
So the block grants have certain set aside, meaning that so much funding has to be put into certain categories. And one of them is first episode psychosis. So there's a 10% set aside in all the mental health grants. So the base block grants, the ARPA, the COVID, 10% of that funding has to be focused for services and programs for first episode psychosis. I don't know if we want to go to the reason for that is because of the great need, how that just changes the trajectory of someone's life. And they want to make sure that there's a focus on that, and that's why, they put the money there. There is a crisis set aside of 5% in the grants that the money has to be spent on addressing crisis services. There is also a set aside that doesn't have a percentage, but is based off of a historical figure, actually all the way back to 1994, for children with serious emotional disturbance. So some of the funding, we collaborate with DCYF. That funding goes through some MOUs to DCYF to make sure those services are being provided for state of Rhode Island for children with serious emotional disturbance. And their prevention. In our substance use block grants, it's probably the biggest one is 20% of that has to be for prevention. And, whether you want to start with the program leads or the money leads, which means that there's a lot of information that is required from the state on how we spend our money in prevention. I hit all of them? I think that was all of them.
Okay. Great. I'll turn it over to you, Linda. We fall under the purview of the open meetings law. I think that was been brought to our attention, I'd say, in the last 2 or 3 years. Prior to that, we did follow it, generally speaking, but not in any kind of specific way. So, Linda, you can brief us on that.
Before I start, I just want to recognize the Deputy Director of the Department Louis Serbo. Thank you for joining us this morning. But the open meetings law, it's regulated and monitored by the Secretary of State, and open meetings were created to inform the public of policy developments. And the important thing to know is that it was created in 1989. It was before any kind of, no one even thought of conference calls, and of course Zoom and Teams meetings. 40 years old, for close to it. So it has been a struggle since all this new technology has come in. When it was created, it was just to make sure the buildings were accessible. That's all. That was why it was created, to make sure everyone could get into a building and attend a meeting in person. Of course, we must keep written minutes, which we do, filed with the Secretary of State. And there's, a certain format, and, luckily Tia takes care of that very well for us. The meetings have to be held in person. Now, we do give a Zoom option. However, what people don't know is that if you are a voting member, you are not allowed to participate remotely. You shouldn't even be speaking. You should be muted, and you can take it in, but you cannot, and you're not even counted as present, because the law does not recognize any telecommunications. The only way you can participate, the only two exceptions are if you are in active military duty and you want to call in, or if you have a disability and you get a disability waiver from the Governor's Commission on Disabilities. Those are the only two waivers that allow you to participate remotely. The quorums are required. There have been a few times when we didn't have a quorum, we had to cancel the day of the meeting. So it's really important that everybody show up, because the ones that are on Zoom didn't count. So that's one of the reasons why we were always sending out reminder emails. Are you coming? Are you attending? And we need to know we have a quorum. Meetings are open. There is some people have closed door meetings. Committee can go into a closed door meeting. That doesn't ever pertain to us. We really haven't ever had to do that, from what I know. Public is welcome to attend and encouraged to attend any meeting. And every meeting has public comment. That's and the public comment is very fruitful. That's one thing that's really good about the law. Isn't it? So, yeah, the meetings parts of the meeting that go into closed door session, because they're exempt, would be a job performance, collective bargaining, investigations of misconduct, or acquisitions of property. So obviously, that's nothing that would ever, pertain to us. And all votes are taken on any matters that come before the council, and the votes are taken and they are made public. And I think that's about it for open meetings. Does anyone have any questions about it? It is the bane of our existence in some ways. I'm not looking at you, Senator, but
we've been trying to, tweak. So
we're hoping, we're hoping it would just be great if members could attend remotely. That's really, I think, what every public body would like. So, any questions?
I think the governor's executive order had suspended the open meetings law for a period of time during COVID. So we meet, vote, conduct our business remotely. But since that expired months ago.
Really wonderful, because government at its best, here we said, everybody was able to participate. Everyone had a voice. That voice was recorded. It was just, it was great. And then it just went back to the old restrictions. And are you going to do the webcast?
I can, but I think that I'll give it, can we go to it? Can you click on that, Tia, and bring it up? The WebBeGuest. WebGAS is the system that we communicate with SAMHSA. On my computer. You can click on it. Not to, I'll try to remember my password. So WebGAS is public, okay? So if you go onto the WebGAS page, the page, it should be. How do we get this one to show up there? And that was back to. Do we have to go off of sharing? Everybody, if you go to the BHDDH website, it'll give you the password, which is the, the general, Tia, go back to where you just were because you're clicking on this. Isn't it one of these down here? No. Share. She tried to get that up. Anybody can go on there, okay? And look at WebGAS. What that does is it's Citizen Rhode Island, and Citizen, I think, is the password, which is on our website. It'll tell you that. This is going to show you what the plan is for Rhode Island, what the expenses are, what we spend in general categories. Not individual like agencies, but say you want to go find out how much in Rhode Island do we spend on prevention. You go to this website and it looks a little bit overwhelming the first time, but I guess because I work in it so much that it, maybe for me, but you have to get the little drop down boxes and kind of go for it. But here you will find on there that 500, 400 page document that gives the plan for Rhode Island. Here you're going to find our plans that we submit and update. One of the things that this will do is you can see that how many times a particular plan was revised, for example. And when we want to change something in our plan, we'll ask our PL that's to reject something. I just want to put that out there because when you look at this and you go, gee, Rhode Island is getting rejected, and they have to do these revisions, that's not a request. Okay, so you know that we want to update this plan or we want to change something, so the content officer has to go in and reject our plan to submit a new one. I was hoping to be able to show you specifically each member. I would like you to try to go into WebGAS under Citizen Rhode Island Citizen and look at membership. Membership, you have to scroll all the way down to one of the applications and look for your name. I want you to look for your name and make sure that you are listed correctly. If I get listed as a person in recovery, so I was making notes as everybody was going and introducing themselves. Make sure it's listed there correctly. It has a place to include people's phone numbers and addresses. I do not put that in just because I think that that's a little bit too much information, on the web, So I just put in your name and your email address because SAMHSA wants contact information in there. So, again, if there's something listed incorrectly under your name, I would like you to email me and let me know. And I will come in and ask for a request and make changes there. If there's things in there that you have questions about, I have to give Ian a little, I'm going to stand up because I feel like it's a little hard for some people to see. I really appreciate questions, right? Because questions that help us kind of gear towards what we're doing and correcting these. I want the information on this website to be correct. I want people to understand it. So please feel free. I always, give our contact information, send us an email and we'll look at it and we'll correct it if it needs to be corrected. This is something that you can be looking at in all those other months outside of August. This is the best way probably for you to know what the plan is and what the spending is. There's different people that input into this website that we just cannot get to come up right now. We have our data unit that does outcomes. Here's where you're going to see outcomes. We have some benchmarks in the state that say that we have to we've made a commitment to serve so many people, like homeless population. That's one of the categories, making sure that we're working with RI Housing and the COC to make sure that that those people get services. So you're going to see, it's going to tell you there whether we made our benchmark last year or we did not make it. And it very clearly says, did not make benchmark. And then we have to put a plan into SAMHSA as to why didn't we make it and what are we going to do next time around to make sure that we make it. So that's why it's important for you guys to be looking at this website in between so that when August does come around and we're talking about block grant, if you're familiar with this site, then you're going to kind of know some of the history and what we're talking about at that time. I actually wonder if people are up to it and are interested in, what we could do is set up another remote meeting, and I don't know if we're allowed to do that. A remote, you just go through WebBeGuest. It wouldn't be a council meeting, maybe just a tutorial by Donna on WebBeGuest.
Can't do it if it's more than 7 people and it's the open meeting.
Oh, so we could do it in like a group of 6.
You can do it.
Are interested, we could do that because that's the best way. I like remote meetings for when you're reviewing something. You know, it's easier to see, to share the screen and go through some of these categories. I know Ian has to, right? Maybe do something like that.
I keep trying to do reports on it and there's some little thing that I'm not doing right that I can't run reports. I don't know, maybe I can try to help you with that Zoom so you can try to show it.
I don't know, but I do know that I have always found reports off of there to be completely pointless. Maybe what reports will do on there, you have to, it's funny because it'll say, do you want the whole nation? It can compare states, right? It can compare Rhode Island to another state. But, you know, those are coming to me like almost like apples and oranges just because of the different sizes and such. But we can walk through pulling up one of those reports. It also, it's also a good way to find out about the history. It goes back really far. You can go back by year and see what spending was. One of the things I mentioned that our set aside for children with emotional disturbances, we have to, the set aside is whatever you spent in 1994, you have to be spending today. So, you know, the dollars are very different, but, you know, in relation, that's where we find out actually how much we spent, you know, because we could go back on that webpage and do that. So is there any questions that you have about WebBeGuest, which is, by the way, a SAMHSA website, by the way. The SAMHSA website, they have control. There's those of us at the state that have permissions to upload information into it. I don't know if I finished saying this, but our data unit uploads data. Our fiscal unit updates all those spending categories. And then Rebecca and we do a lot of the written narrative plan. And a lot of those plans are going to be in there as attachments. So by the way, an easy way to get some plans is to hit view attachment. Then you don't have to go through everything. And then you can pull up some of the narrative plans that the state had.
If someone wants to get on there before you do your tutorial, they just type in WebBeGuest in the browser line. And
But that's when you get into it and what you're going to see.
It's a super secret pathway.
It's super secret. Put on our website. But you can't make any changes. You can only. I found out actually when Ian was asking questions, that was the first time I found out that you get a different view than what I get when I log in. So I didn't know that.
I think it's special just for Ian.
Maybe it's just Ian, yeah, maybe. May.
I was gonna say, because you sent us an email with that.
Yes.
In the,
Yeah. We can do that. Yeah, that's okay. But that makes it easier if you can just, because we can put the link in there, you can just click on it and it takes you right to it.
I just want to let you know that my email is wrong on the sheet. It's a 0 instead of a O.
Oh, okay. So that's Linda, that's your.
Yeah, you have been getting the notices, right?
Yeah.
Been getting them.
Yeah, okay, good.
And this is what, right, and Tara, this is, I used this to input the data into WebBeGuest. I'm sure it's wrong on WebBeGuest, that's Tara.
There's some kind of goal section
Yeah, it's table, I'm pretty sure that's table 8A. Table 8A is the one that goes through, and by the way you have to enter this, you enter it by application and the application year. And then there's a table 8A, and that table lists kind of our benchmarks that Rhode Island has set throughout the years on specific categories that SAMHSA is interested in. Target population for SAMHSA is women and children, women who are pregnant and are injecting. So we have to make sure, as you might know, as some providers, is that you have to prioritize that population to make sure that population gets moved to the top of wait, that they're actually not waiting services. For example, that one is in that table. Services to persons experiencing homelessness are in that table as well. So it'll show you, did Rhode Island make their benchmark of making sure that we serve those populations?
Are there any questions about anything? A question I'm sometimes asked if we've had resignations in the council, people move or their situation changes. There is no organizational reserve seat. So if you're here because of an organization, that may be fine, but if you've been appointed by the governor, except for those 5 or 6 that are in statute for organizations like AFL-CIO or SHMLAC, you are here. So your replacement may not come from your organization unless you're in that category. So don't feel it's you who's appointed. We know that you're in a particular position. That may change, but if you leave, it's not we're filling that seat from that particular position. All right.
Before someone leaves permanently, if there's a need to have a designated attendant in your place, is that an option?
Designated
a designee for a current council appointee, but not in the situation you described where they permanently leave the council?
Yeah, we've got different opinions on it. You can always have someone like today the question is, can you vote? So unless it specifically says in statute designee, then the designee can vote. Otherwise, the person just attending on your behalf but can't vote, doesn't count for the quorum.
Does not.
No.
So if a family member leaves, you would replace somebody with a family member.
Well, because we have a certain quota of family members, most likely that would be the case. But if you're working for ABC organization and you leave, it's not like someone else from ABC organization is going to be on there, unless they're designated as one of those 5. Mental health advocate, child advocate, AFL-CIO, SHMLAC, missing one. Hospital Association or AL. Those would be the only ones. Before I forget, I would like to thank Janet for she played a behind-the-scenes role, very much getting this orientation done here. So thank you for your effort in this. We've been talking about it for a while, trying to find the perfect time, and it finally happened. So thank you for pushing us across the finish line. Appreciate that.
Are there any open positions?
Yes, there are. I'm not sure the exact number. There's probably like 4 or 5. And we'll be talking to the new chair about a process for filling them. The quorum is 7. So as you know, we've got, I think 32 members or something. And so the quorum is not 51%. It's a much smaller number. So we've been able to meet that, generally speaking.
Who sets the agenda, Rich?
The agenda gets approved by the chair. Usually Linda and Tia work off the agenda as to what's in the parking lot for future meetings. So a lot of times the agenda is a presentation or 2 at the beginning of the meeting, as you know, and someone would say, I'd like to present on a needs assessment on addiction treatment in Rhode Island. Well, we will queue you up for April or May, and then it gets into that. That's one of the ways. So we try to make sure there's enough information. A few times we've erred on the side of putting too much there and we run over a little bit. So try not to do that. It's hard to get a half-hour presentation, ask questions for 3 minutes. You need more time for the Q&A. Then we have the reports and then any new or old business. Because of the open meetings law, we do have to note ahead of time what we'll be voting on. So the old way we used to conduct business was a topic would come up as a new item or old item, there'd be a discussion, say, well, why don't we, take a position on this? And we would do so and communicate that to the governor's office and General Assembly. Probably can't do that anymore. We have to say, we'll put it for a vote at the next meeting. So sometimes time is of the essence. Hey, you've got to get it done because, the legislative session is going to end or the bill filing is going to end. And that's what we end up trying to trip across. But that's the only one of the.
And actually, we've, at the request of the council, which we had in, August, when we talked about the last, block grant application, is we were trying to make a focus to get our data unit to be giving outcomes presentations on specific areas. So just so that you're tying that together, there's been a couple of them so far. We talked about how overwhelming it is for the block grant application. And then to start talking about outcomes, you really can't do that in one big bucket. They have to be broken down by services, and we've actually been doing that. That was when, and I know Avery gave a presentation and prevention gave some presentations. So those are all pieces of the block grant application, and that is the part where it's the outcomes, just so that that's tied together when you're viewing it.
Yeah, you can't have one meeting on all outcomes.
Yeah.
Be like a 6-hour meeting.
So given that the presentations are often new information and complex, and I need time to put them in context. I think Megan brought it up at the last meeting, the request that whenever possible, we get at least the PowerPoints, maybe 48 hours before the meeting, so that time to look at it and then can actually ask informed questions.
Yeah. Definitely try that. Sometimes the PowerPoint just have talking points, and so it may not be helpful. But the Department of Administration, it becomes an eye test too, to look at some of those PowerPoints across, 100 feet room space. So we understand. So we try to do that. Sometimes it's not ready until the last minute, but okay. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
So Rich, so the chair doesn't get too many emails when you're asked about putting stuff on the agenda, do they do an email?
It could be the chair. I would definitely copy Linda. I copy Linda and Tia. But then it gets triaged, how much time, is this a priority? We've had this, because some will say, I'd like to present, and it's a general topic. And I say, well, you gotta be a little more specific, we can't just have a PowerPoint presentation about mental health. So, yeah, I'd still do the chair. Unless directed otherwise by the new chair. Any other questions?
I guess I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Coming into this council and not being part of a government behavioral health organization, I get a little lost sometimes. And so recommendations for community members on how to sort of get up to speed more quickly. And, when you throw around all of the shortened terms and whatnot, I know eventually I'll figure it out just by continuing to show up. But yeah, so I would take any recommendations.
What would you find helpful with that?
I mean, just how the systems talk to each other. I know what you mean. There's a lot of acronyms.
We'll definitely need to try not to use acronyms.
Yeah, but I can send out a list that of all the acronyms. I mean, it's just, but it might be helpful for.
Well, that and also like how the different organizations like work together or talk to each other.
Organizations and state government?
Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah.
Question, we'll keep that in mind.
Sample Office of Healthy Aging works with the Healthy Community Office, Community Office. I don't know.
City Providence.
Yeah.
Anything else?
It froze, the TV froze. That's why we couldn't get it to come up. Yeah, that's frozen there, so.
Recording though.
Yeah, well, if there are no other questions, we can adjourn, give you back 50 minutes of your day or so for. Yeah.
It, rather than him doing the 6 and 6 and 6, because I really think what we were supposed to do, this webcast would be valuable for everybody. Could we just do it as one of these meetings, even if it is a bonus council meeting, a day of the evening meeting, just to, help people understand.
Have it as a brief technical assistance beforehand, sure.
Or to see how many people are interested. If you can, on your way out, let me know and I'll keep a list and we'll see how many people are interested.
Yeah, we could, the only thing is that, in that room, I wouldn't be able to see where that cursor's moving. Department administration. I mean, the governor's council meeting was held here for about 10 years or so. And then the meeting had, the whole building had to be vacated because of hazardous waste. So then we couldn't, we couldn't accommodate, between mold and asbestos. So we couldn't accommodate in place else, and then COVID happened, and so we ended up downtown, which is fine because that's the only capacity for the telecommunications. But the room doesn't, relatively small TV given the size of. We'll consider all that. Yes, Jen.
That we want to have a better voice in the plan, the needs assessment, everything through the year. The way we could understand it is understand.
Yeah, and I think Donna's heard loud and clear about getting input early enough into that process. So, yes.
All right.
Laurie.
Thank you. Just wondering, is there any room in our monthly events to have, juicier discussions about some of the topics that we all hear about, like could be criminal justice and the rise in homeless individuals with SPMI, or rates or wait lists or anything like that, where we could really dive into topics and hear each other's viewpoints and see how we can collaborate with one another?
I like that, as opposed to having a couple of formal presentations, spend our time doing that kind of deep dive. That's great. Yeah.
We'd have to have, prepare ahead of time to get the information data, but that is absolutely fine. If some of you could want to send me an email and then on some of those topics, and I can just have a conversation with the right department who could look into it and prepare us for some discussions. I don't know I don't think there's any state tracking on wait lists. So there's none of that information. But there may be for residential programs in terms of wait lists for residential. So it would, those would be helpful. I know what the solution would be. I don't know if we come up with a solution, but I think the topic may be exciting in many areas. So thank you. Yeah.
Is it just me or is this council exceptionally protocol driven?
Probably driven by the chair.
Oh.
Well, I'm not sure again about protocol, but I mean, some of it is dictated in the statute. And,
it's like we have to go through step A, B, C, D before we start.
In terms of the public discussion piece or recommendations, old and new business, there can be recommendations made there, and we would take some action on following up on it. So that's. If it wasn't fit into the agenda ahead of time, there's always an opportunity to say, hey, how about we talk about X, in the next three or so months. So the question would be, who's gonna get that ready? Yeah. Then that'd be okay.
Can we make recommendations to kick people off?
Looking at it. No.
I'm here for
Oh, you need that pension too, huh?
The public comment at the end that's supposed to be at these open meetings. Isn't that what Lori's talking about? That people can bring up any topic they want. What is that purpose of that public?
They can any topic. The issue we have is time. So if that happens, there's a minute left, that's not fair. But we don't have, we can reserve 15 minutes for that and you have nothing, and then you jam the agenda and have extra time at the end. So a lot of times they'll get introduced to that public comment and then discussed offline and then brought back as an agenda item. That's the way it's happened. So Okay, if, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So move. Second, first, second, okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, abstention, meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.